A broken childhood on the outskirts of Texas, Sarah's earliest memories were a patchwork of longing and loss, set against the vast, sun-baked landscapes of suburban Texas. She lived in a modest, single-story house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, where the only sounds most evenings were distant dogs barking and the low hum of her father's pickup returning from work. Her world changed forever the year she turned 7, when her mother, her source of warmth and guidance, passed away after a brief, unexpected illness. The months that followed were a blur of funerals, unfamiliar faces, and awkward silences at the dinner table. Sarah's father, once gentle and present, threw himself into his job as an oil rig supervisor, sometimes working weekends and coming home just to sleep. He rarely spoke about his feelings, and the sadness in his eyes soon hardened into something Sarah couldn't understand. Instead of comforting her, he seemed desperate to fill the void in his own life. Not long after, he remarried. Linda, her new stepmother, arrived with crisp blouses, perfectly manicured nails, and little interest in bonding with her husband's grieving daughter. Sarah quickly noticed the subtle slights: the way Linda would serve her a smaller piece of pie at dinner, the strict new rules about toys and television, the cold, clipped tone in her voice if Sarah made a mistake, spilling milk or tracking mud on the rug. Linda's disapproval was icy and immediate, often turning into whispered complaints to her father behind closed doors. Friendship was hard to come by. Neighbors pitied her, but the children at school sensed her sadness, and she became reserved and cautious, rarely inviting anyone back to her house. The once happy home grew heavy with an unspoken tension. Every morning, Sarah woke early to finish chores that used to be shared: sweeping the porch, folding laundry, and making her own lunch. Her father, preoccupied and distant, rarely noticed when Linda scolded Sarah for the smallest infractions or assigned her more work. Even as Sarah brought home report cards, glowing with praise from teachers, there were no celebrations or words of encouragement. Instead, her accomplishments were met with indifference, or, at best, a terse, "That's what you're supposed to do." At night, long after her chores were done and the house fell silent, Sarah would curl up with memories of her mother and dream restlessly of a different life, one where she was cherished, understood, and free. The loneliness she carried shaped her resilience and taught her early that, in her world, love and acceptance could not be taken for granted. Years of endurance and the longing to escape. As Sarah moved into her teenage years, the weight of her daily existence seemed to increase with each passing season. No longer a child, she understood the unspoken rules of her household all too well. Keep quiet, don't challenge Linda's authority, and never expect a word of affection from her father. The chores multiplied: laundry, dishes, scrubbing bathroom tiles, weeding the front yard, even as the resentment within her grew. Weekdays were a monotonous cycle. Mornings began before dawn, with Sarah crept quietly down the hallway to avoid waking Linda, hoping to finish her chores before school. Any small misstep, an unwashed plate, dust missed on a bookshelf, would lead to sharp looks, biting comments, or even days of silent treatment from her stepmother. After long hours at school, where she kept her head down and avoided drawing attention, Sarah would head straight home and dive into more responsibilities. She prepared dinner, completed homework at the kitchen table amid scolding words, and retreated to her small, sparsely decorated room each night, comforted only by the glow of a desk lamp and the company of library books. Despite her efforts, nothing ever felt good enough. Achievements that would have earned praise in other homes. A perfect math test, a medal at the science fair, were met in Sarah's world with shrugs or sneers. "That's just what's expected," Linda would say, or sometimes not say anything at all. Sarah's father, tired and withdrawn, left almost all matters of discipline or acknowledgement to his wife. Internally, Sarah's resentment mingled with a fierce determination. She knew there had to be more to life than enduring endless criticism and cold silences. Often, she would lie awake, listening to trains in the distance, imagining where each one might be headed. New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, anywhere but here. College was her lifeline, the beacon she clung to in her darkest moments. She poured herself into her grades, pored over scholarship programs, and researched universities late at night, mapping out her escape with the precision of someone who knew her future depended on it. While classmates spent their weekends at football games or hanging out at the mall, Sarah worked part-time jobs at local diners and grocery stores, making extra money to squirrel away. A secret fund for her eventual departure. Every dollar saved, every A on a report card, brought her one step closer to freedom. Throughout these years, loneliness was her constant companion, but hope was her engine. No matter how much the walls seemed to close in at home, Sarah reminded herself, one day, all this would end. One day, she would find her own place in the world, far from the suffocating confines of that quiet Texas cul-de-sac, rising above fate. Graduation day in Texas was blistering hot, the kind of suffocating June afternoon that pressed down on the town like a warning never to step out of line. Sarah sat at the edge of the crowd in her navy cap and gown, heart thundering in her chest. She clutched her diploma just a little tighter than most. This slip of paper meant more than an achievement or the end of high school. It was a ticket out, a tangible symbol of every lonely night spent, hunched over textbooks, every sacrifice, every outsmarted obstacle. While parents cheered and siblings snapped photos all around her, Sarah searched the stands for a familiar face. Only her father sat in the far back row, arms crossed, blank-faced. Linda didn't bother to show up. Sarah's plan had always been both audacious and precise. She would escape not just the house that suffocated her, but the entirety of her inherited small-town life. Other students discussed community colleges or nearby universities, but Sarah had spent months poring over applications late at night, pushing herself through every essay, every form, every financial aid letter. When the acceptance came from Columbia University in New York City with a full scholarship, the feeling was like being handed the keys to another universe. There were no tears of happiness at home, no celebratory dinner. Linda rolled her eyes and muttered, "Don't expect much when you come crawling back." Sarah simply packed her bags, every movement careful and deliberate, resistant to nostalgia. She boarded her one-way flight with nothing but a battered suitcase and a folder of important documents. The city that greeted her was a far cry from the sun-bleached stillness of Texas. New York was chaos and motion, the clang of subway trains, a million scents in voices colliding into an exhilarating din. Sarah's heart quickened with a cocktail of fear and hope. She found solace in the diversity of faces, the anonymity that let her blend in, start fresh. Dorm life was a culture shock. Her first roommate, Zoe, was an art student from Boston with lavender hair and a sticker-covered laptop. The girls across the hall played guitar at midnight. For the first time, Sarah wasn't the odd one out. No one at Columbia cared about her past, her accent, the way she triple-checked her dorm lock. Yet, she felt like an imposter, as if someone would soon burst in and shoo her back to Texas. But she pressed on, her spiral notebook filling with careful planning, reminders, and lists of goals. Sarah took on a dizzying, almost punishing schedule. Early morning classes, late-night library shifts, part-time work at a crowded cafe on Columbus Avenue. She meticulously tracked every dollar, skipping meals on days her budget ran low, and shopped with a calculator at discount markets in Harlem. Her hard-working habits from Texas served her well, though exhaustion often threatened to swallow her whole. Failure to Sarah was not an option. She had told herself too many times that returning home would mean defeat, vindication for all those who doubted her. Amid the grind, unexpected moments of joy began to break through. In the middle of her first winter, Sarah gathered with new friends in Central Park to stage a snowball fight. She learned how to laugh from her gut, to loosen her grip on control just long enough to dance in someone's dorm room at 2 a.m. Professors noticed her, encouraged her, challenged her. For the first time, Sarah felt supported. She switched her major to computer science after acing an intro course, discovering a knack for logic and algorithms that felt both empowering and exhilarating. Her passion for technology became a refuge, a way to solve problems, exert control, and imagine a future untethered from pain. Internships followed, first at a scrappy startup in Brooklyn, then at a tech giant headquartered in Manhattan. Sarah faced new challenges: competitive peers, impossible deadlines, coded bias, but tackled them with the grit honed over years of adversity. When the older engineers questioned her abilities, she redoubled her efforts, often staying late to debug code or teach herself a new tool. She volunteered at hackathons, founded a coding club for young women, and slowly built a network of mentors and collaborators. Graduation from Columbia brought tears this time, not out of grief, but pride. Her father received the invitation Sarah mailed, but he didn't attend. Linda never wrote or called. Yet, standing in a sea of blue gowns at the university's commencement, Sarah realized her old wounds burned less fiercely. She had earned her victory herself. For the first time, no one could take it away. Job offers arrived soon after, and Sarah chose a California tech company where she could learn fast and innovate. The transition to Silicon Valley was difficult. More cost-cutting, cramped shared apartments. But she embraced the pressure. She advanced quickly, impressing superiors with her tenacity, clarity of vision, and refusal to give up. By her late 20s, Sarah had become a rising star in the field, ultimately co-founding her own startup in San Francisco. The initial struggle was immense. Sleepless nights perfecting the product, rounds of investor pitches, and more than one near bankruptcy. But her leadership style, disciplined yet empathetic, demanding but fair, won the loyalty of her team and the respect of major investors. As her company soared, Sarah purchased her own modern apartment with sweeping views of the city, vastly different from her childhood home's tiny windows and hand-me-down furniture. She joined charitable programs that funded scholarships for disadvantaged girls in tech, quietly offsetting the pain of her past by reaching back for others in need. On rare, quiet evenings, gazing out at San Francisco's glittering skyline, she allowed herself to breathe in the satisfaction of hard-won success. She still carried scars, periodic nightmares, a lingering distrust of sudden kindness. But these became mere reminders of how far she'd come. No longer driven solely by bitterness or fear, Sarah found she could celebrate her wins and even embrace moments of vulnerability. She maintained a polite distance from Texas, sending the occasional holiday card, but never returning. Her story, once marked by abandonment, was now defined by resilience. redemption, and self-made triumph. Where others might have crumbled under the weight of abandonment and cruelty, Sarah rose instead. She built not only a career, but a life on her own terms, a life characterized by freedom, respect, and the belief that the past, no matter how painful, did not have to determine the future. The city lights below seemed to whisper proof. Sometimes, the greatest revenge is simply to live beautifully and well. The return of the past. It was a bleak Tuesday afternoon in late February, the kind of day when the rain drummed relentlessly against Sarah's floor-to-ceiling windows in her San Francisco apartment, and the city itself seemed to blur beyond the wet glass. As she sat at her home office desk, half buried in diagrams and code, half distracted by the hypnotic drizzle, her phone buzzed, flashing a name she hadn't seen in years. It was the building's doorman. "Ms. Bishop," he said after a moment's hesitation, "there are two people here asking for you. They say they're family." She found them huddled awkwardly by the seating area, soaked from the rain, clutching a battered suitcase and each other. Her father looked diminished, stooped, thinner, as if life itself had worn him down to the bone. Linda's carefully lined face was marked by worry and exhaustion. Her hair, once immaculately styled, was streaked with gray. For a moment, none of them spoke. The silence stretched, heavy with the weight of all the years, and words unsaid. Linda broke first. "Sarah," she said, voice trembling at the edges. We're sorry to show up unannounced. We didn't know where else to go." Sarah's face remained calm, almost unreadable. "You found me," she replied. She could feel something knotting in her stomach. Resentment, memory, maybe even pity. Her father shifted uncomfortably, his eyes never quite meeting hers. "We've had some trouble. Business went under. The house is gone. Everything's gone. We don't have anywhere else." He trailed off, the words barely more than a whisper. Sarah glanced at the suitcase, then at the hands clutching it. Her stepmother's rings gone, her father's knuckles raw from cold and worry. She felt a strange detachment, as if she were watching another family's drama unfold. For years, she had rehearsed this moment in her mind, imagining how she might send them away, how she'd finally obtain the upper hand. Now that they were standing on her doorstep in need, reality felt different. Emotion and memory jostled with a colder logic, the self-preservation she had mastered through a lifetime of grievance. She invited them to take the elevator up.
Here you go.
In the silence of that ride, her mind churned. The pull of old anger was strong, but so too was a flicker of something darker, a sense that this was her chance, the moment fate had circled back. She'd spent her whole life seeking approval, dignity, and a place of her own. Now, they stood before her, helpless, hopeful, perhaps finally aware of what life had been like for her. In the apartment, Linda and her father glanced around awkwardly at the modern furniture, the walls lined with books and awards, the filtered city light. Sarah offered them towels and coffee. For several minutes, they sat in the living room, shivering and silent, too proud or too ashamed to say more. Linda was the first to speak again. "We lost it all, Sarah. I'm not asking for much. Just a chance to get back on our feet. If there's anything you could do to help." She trailed off, eyes wide, searching Sarah's face for anything resembling forgiveness or generosity. Sarah watched them closely, remembering the icy silences after her mother's death. The years when both of these people, one by cruelty, the other by inaction, had allowed her to suffer. She mentally sized up the moment, almost as a chess player would. There would be compassion, perhaps, but no return to the dynamics of her childhood. Helping them felt inevitable, but so did holding them to account. She listened to their story, her stepmother's failed business ventures, her father's mounting debts, the foreclosure, the cascade of financial disaster that pushed them from modest comfort to desperation. It was a narrative Sarah knew well, for hardship had shaped her entire young life. But sympathy was complicated, especially when her own pain lingered, never quite given voice or justice. After a long silence, Sarah spoke. "I'm not the same girl you left behind in Texas," she said, voice even, almost steely. "I worked for everything I have, and nobody made it easy for me. If you're here for help, it comes with conditions." She could see surprise flicker across Linda's face, and something like regret darken her father's tired expression. Gone was the entitlement or expectation of her youth. In its place, the exhaustion and humility of two people out of options. Sarah continued, "I run a company. There's work you can do. Basic, hands-on, the kind of work I did when I was your age. You'll have a place to stay, but it won't be here. It'll be the kind of apartment I could afford when I was starting out. Small, no frills. And you'll follow the rules I set, just like I once followed yours." There was a stunned silence. Linda started to protest, then stopped as she realized the position they were in. Her father nodded, a slow, almost grateful acknowledgement, though pain flickered in his eyes. Sarah rose to refill their coffee. In her kitchen, she steadied herself, realizing that kindness and retribution were often separated by the thinnest of lines. She recalled every night hunched over textbooks, every whispered insult, all the ways they'd ignored her need for comfort and support. And yet, the woman she had become, fierce, independent, unbreakable, was forged in those fires. When she returned, Linda and her father were seated quietly, hands wrapped around steaming mugs. Sarah outlined her plan in careful detail: hours, responsibilities, expectations, and boundaries. No. She spoke, not in anger, but with the clinical clarity of someone who had long ago learned to guard her own heart. For the first time, her stepmother and father listened, truly listened. Perhaps shame made them humble, or perhaps nothing focuses the mind like loss and exhaustion. They agreed to her terms, knowing there was no alternative. As night crept in, Sarah watched the city lights flicker on below her window. The visit had cracked something open inside her, a wound she had nursed for years, facing the very people who had shaped her past. She didn't know if she felt vindicated, saddened, or strangely empty, but whatever lay ahead, she would decide the terms of her own story. The ghosts of Texas had finally come knocking, but it would be on her ground, by her rules, and this time she would not let herself be undone. The ruthless revenge plan. The morning after their arrival, the rain had stopped, but the air in Sarah's apartment remained heavy. Linda and her father emerged from the spare room, quiet, stripped of entitlement, waiting to hear what would become of them. Sarah, already dressed in the crisp attire of a CEO, was reviewing documents at the kitchen counter. She did not offer breakfast. Instead, she slid a folder across the marble countertop. "This is your employment packet," she said flatly, her voice devoid of affection, but not cruel. "You start tomorrow. Facilities work, cleaning, maintenance, supply runs. Each of you will report to the supervisor on site. You'll clock in and out, no exceptions." Linda glanced down at the papers in disbelief. "You want us to clean?" Sarah met her gaze. "Yes. I scrubbed bathrooms and took out trash for years. I expect you to do the same." Her tone was even, as if she announced the weather. "You'll be paid fairly." If you slack off, you're gone, just like anywhere else. Her father silently took the papers, his hands shaking ever so slightly, but he nodded. Sarah pointed out a small handbook listing company rules: uniform, conduct, punctuality. There was a page at the end that required their signatures, a contract, both legal and symbolic. "You will be held to every standard," she said. "Favoritism isn't in my vocabulary." She handed them a set of keys. "You'll move into an apartment I used when I first came to San Francisco. It's a third-floor walk-up in the Mission. Furnished simply, couch, table, 2 beds, and a hot plate. No private parking, no doorman, no luxury. Laundry's 4 blocks away." She paused. "I'll cover first month's rent, but you handle utilities. After 60 days, you pay your own way or find somewhere else." Linda almost sputtered. But even the moving process was calculated. Sarah arranged a rideshare, not a private car, to take them to their new place. She left them with a city map, a prepaid transit card, and a list of rules taped to the fridge. Rent was due the first of the month, in full, no extensions. Any missing workdays would come out of their paychecks. For Linda and her father, the work was grueling from the start. Cleaning office bathrooms, hauling boxes, breaking down recycling after hours. Tasks Linda once would have called menial were now their daily responsibility. Their supervisor, unaware of their family connection to the CEO, was strict, but not unfair. Linda fumbled, blistered her hands, and stumbled through instructions. Sarah's father, once a manager himself, took to the work with quiet humility. But even he wasn't spared from the aches of hard physical labor. Sometimes, Sarah would walk through the facility, clipboard in hand, observing. She never interfered, never let on to the other staff who her new hires were. In team meetings, she was all business, expecting nothing less than professionalism. She never raised her voice, but rules were rules. Tardiness, missed quotas, or carelessness all meant pay deductions or warnings, confirmed by HR emails. At their apartment, life was even starker. Linda, who once obsessed over gourmet coffee and scented candles, now shared a bunk bed with her husband and learned to budget for groceries. The stifling heat of summer crept through cracked windows. The rent checks ate up much of their wages. At night, she nursed sore muscles and stared out the window, wondering at the turn of fortune that had brought her to this reduced state. Sarah checked in only when necessary. She would drop by unannounced, ensuring rules were followed, sheets changed, trash out, rent receipts taped inside a cupboard. She never lingered. If either of them tried to reminisce or plead for easier terms, she reminded them, "I lived here for years. I survived. So can you." Her rules extended further. No visitors allowed, no debts to family. Any infraction meant a written warning. 3 warnings, and they would be evicted from both job and apartment. It was clear this was not a temporary arrangement until they got back on their feet. It was a sustained lesson in humility, modeled on the hardships Sarah herself had endured. For months, Linda and Sarah's father labored. Every blister, every night spent hungry, every condescending look from a supervisor was a pale echo of what Sarah had choked down as a teen and young woman. At work, co-workers speculated about the new older hires, people who worked hard but always looked weary. They had to earn every dollar, every crumb. There were no shortcuts, no forgiveness for mistakes. And Sarah, she watched from the distance, a part of her both satisfied and troubled. At board meetings and company events, she maintained her poise and drive. But late at night, she stared at the ceiling and replayed memories she would have preferred to bury. Linda's cutting remarks, her father's silences, the endless years of being unseen and unappreciated. Her revenge was sophisticated, exacting, and cold, but at times it left her feeling hollow. She wasn't cruel for cruelty's sake. She simply wanted them to taste her old loneliness, to recognize that her success had been forged not despite them, but because of what they had done. Sarah had broken free from their shadow, but now, in imposing her rules, she wondered what kind of shadow she in turn had cast. Weeks became months. Sometimes Sarah saw signs of change. Linda, once so superficial, tried to comfort her husband after a long day, noticing for the first time how fatigue aged his face. Her father, always emotionally stunted, attempted awkward apologies when they crossed paths in the company hallways, looking for words that never quite landed right. Yet Sarah held the line. The rules remained absolute. There would be no affection, no familial leniency, until, if ever, she saw true understanding, true remorse, and genuine transformation. She would help, but only her way, at her pace. Revenge, for Sarah, wasn't about emotional outbursts or public humiliation. It was about engineering an environment where empathy and humility could be born, even if through necessity and pain. Still, in private moments, Sarah asked herself if her justice was becoming indistinguishable from a new kind of cruelty, and what her mother, whose memory she clung to through years of darkness, would think of the woman she had become. But for now, the rules stood. Her conditions were their reality, equalizing the score, one exhausting, soul-searching day at a time. The true face of forgiveness and justice. The passing months blurred into each other, marked not by seasons, but by the slow, grinding pattern of routine and hardship for Linda and Sarah's father. The initial shock of their new reality had faded, replaced by a tired resignation as they scrubbed floors, cleaned bathrooms, and stacked supply boxes in Sarah's company facilities. Each shift, each task, chipped away at remnants of pride and entitlement. Sarah enforced every rule. Late arrivals resulted in lost wages, mistakes meant corrective retraining, and complaints were handled with composed, almost clinical detachment. Their tiny mission apartment reflected their new lives. Minimal, functional, nothing more. Furniture was basic, the beds narrow and creaky. Meals were simple, rationed for cost. The city's noise was a stark contrast to what used to be their quiet suburban life in Texas, and even small pleasures, a cup of coffee, a warm shower, became rare luxuries. Linda's hands, once manicured, now bore the rough calluses of daily labor, and her father's shoulders seemed to carry the collective exhaustion of years lost and mistakes accumulated. In this stripped-down existence, the true nature of both hardship and character slowly revealed itself. Small acts of kindness, once almost unthinkable between Linda and her husband, began to emerge. Linda tended to his scrapes with the clumsy care of someone out of practice with tenderness. He, in turn, started brewing her tea after long days, something he'd never done even in easier times. At first, these gestures were quiet, awkward, and sporadic, but over the months, they grew into habits, tiny, persistent seeds of empathy. For Sarah, each update from the site supervisor felt like confirmation that her plan was working. Or was it vindication she sought? The successes, measured in efficiency percentages and spotless weekly reports, brought satisfaction, but also an unexpected discomfort. She would pause sometimes in the evening, standing at her own kitchen window with the city below, sipping tea the way her mother once had, and wonder what lesson was really being taught, and to whom. From a distance, Sarah observed her father and Linda adapt to their new reality. She witnessed Linda's first hesitant apology to a younger coworker after a mistake, saw her father quietly shoulder extra work to cover for an exhausted cleaner. Occasionally, word trickled back to her through staff. The new hires are polite, or they don't complain, they just work. No one knew they were the CEO's family, and that was precisely how Sarah wanted it. No shortcuts, no reputation borrowed from her name. As their hardship dragged on, both Linda and Sarah's father began to bend, then break, and finally remold themselves into something humbler. There were moments when Linda would sit on their cramped balcony long after midnight, staring at the city lights with tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Her father, now more worn than ever, began to talk again, haltingly sharing regrets about career decisions, about times he'd stayed silent when he should have intervened, about leaving Sarah to fend for herself. One late evening, when Sarah came for an unannounced inspection, she found him lingering at the apartment door. He didn't try to apologize directly, but as Sarah was about to leave, he blurted, "I never knew. I should have known. I let you down." Yet, it was Linda whose transformation was most profound. The woman who once ruled a pristine house with rigid standards had become a fixture at the site, covering others' shifts, volunteering for the dirtiest jobs, and even sharing her home-packed lunches with temporary workers who could not afford a meal. One day she stayed late to help a janitor struggling with English fill-out HR forms, repeating the kind of help she'd once begrudged Sarah as a child. She grew quieter, less quick to judge, and more likely to lend an ear than to complain. As months turned to nearly a year, the lines etched in all their faces told a story of punishment, humility, and slow-moving forgiveness. Sarah struggled nightly with the tension between vengeance and release. There was a fierce satisfaction in seeing her old tormentors brought low, but also an aching hollowness. Was this true justice, or simply an echo of the pain she herself suffered? Change finally crystallized one ordinary Friday as Sarah observed a staff meeting. Linda, now confident with cleaning schedules and supply ordering, spoke up to defend an elderly coworker whose hours had been cut. Rather than distance herself, she stood up for her team. It was a small act, but it struck Sarah as monumental. That evening, Linda found Sarah waiting outside their apartment block, a rare moment with no pretense of business between them. Linda's voice trembled as she spoke. "Sarah, I was a terrible mother to you. I was selfish, and I punished you for things that were never your fault. I can never undo what I did, but I want to try, if you'll let me." In that moment, the icy wall between them softened, not through grand gestures, but through admission, humility, and genuine sorrow. Sarah listened, the words landing not with the fanfare of redemption, but with the slow gravity of truth, finally spoken aloud. Forgiveness was no miracle, no sudden salve on years of hurt. Instead, it was a gradual unfreezing, an opening in Sarah's chest where, for so long, resentment had rooted itself. She found herself able to breathe a little easier, her own anger thawing as she witnessed and felt Linda's and her father's real remorse and metamorphosis. She realized justice wasn't about recreating their pain, but about finding equilibrium, a way to give the past its due, and then, perhaps, let it rest. Sarah didn't wave away consequences or throw wide the doors to privilege, but she offered more flexible terms, slowly allowed small comforts, better shifts, access to job training, assistance for stable housing. She set boundaries, but made them kinder, not punitive. Communication grew, not easy, but more frequent, sometimes even marked by tentative laughter or reminiscing about better flashes of the distant past. The road to reconciliation was long and uneven, but by letting go of vengeance, Sarah discovered a new form of power rooted in empathy rather than dominance. And for Linda and her father, survival had distilled their pride into wisdom, reminding them that dignity was not given or inherited, but earned through honest work and humility. In the end, Sarah found herself changed, not only by what she demanded from those who hurt her, but by the choice to see them as capable of change. Forgiveness, she realized, was both justice and mercy, an assertion that the future, unlike the past, could still be written with a gentle hand. The final choice: hold on to grudges or let go. Forgiveness, Sarah had discovered, was not a gate that swung on a simple hinge. One decision, one moment, and suddenly all would be well. Instead, it was a landscape she wandered through slowly and often unwillingly, hills and valleys of old pain, glimpses of hope, and haunted by the echoes of the past. Now, with nearly a year past since her father and stepmother had arrived, lost and destitute, on her doorstep, Sarah found herself standing at an invisible crossroads. The question that had always loomed in the recesses of her mind, rising urgently into daylight. Would she hold on to the bitterness that had defined her, or finally set it down and walk forward, unburdened? Her life had changed as profoundly as theirs. The long experiment with discipline, justice, and controlled mercy had not only remade her parents, but had also altered the strict lines of Sarah's own heart, where once she believed that fairness meant everyone tasting the same bitterness she once did. Now she saw that sometimes revenge bred only more emptiness in its aftermath. The powerful, even intoxicating satisfaction she felt from imposing her rules had faded, replaced with something gentler, more complex, a compassion that came not from forgetting, but from understanding. Yet the urge for retribution, the shadow of old wounds, was difficult to vanquish. On certain nights, face pressed to the cold window pane and the city glowing below, Sarah's mind slipped back to Texas. She remembered her mother's laugh echoing through sunlit rooms, the hush that fell after her passing, the punishments that grew out of unattended grief, the long, hungry walks past locked doors, and the knowledge no comfort was coming. Anger still flickered, a defensive spark, a phantom shield. If she let it go, what would be left to protect her? One evening, she sat at her kitchen table, sorting through old photographs and letters she'd kept sealed for years. She found a school portrait, herself at 12, unsmiling, hair clipped straight, eyes already wary, and beneath it, a letter from a teacher praising her brightness and kindness. "You have so much to give the world, Sarah. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Tears welled unexpectedly. How many years had she given to proving her worth, to making herself invulnerable, only to realize that armor weighed heavy and cut both ways? In the months since Linda and her father's tearful admissions, there had been many chances for reconnection. At first, Sarah kept things strictly transactional, improving their living conditions, approving job training, but never inviting them into her private world. She watched from a careful distance as Linda, now humbler, began to reach out in genuinely caring ways, leaving care packages at Sarah's door, offering thoughtful, handwritten notes, even a simple request to have coffee together. Her father, changed by the monotony and humility of hard labor, spoke little, but listened intently when invited. His apologies, now actions, more than words. Gradually, Sarah tested the boundaries of trust. She organized joint dinners, not at her glimmering apartment high above the Mission District, but at modest diners and cafes, where the conversation could feel neutral. The first attempts were awkward. Silence filled the gaps between bites, and every topic seemed weighted with history. Yet, as the months unfurled and new traditions formed, something warmer took root. They began to share stories, not only of regret and apology, but slivers of happiness, humor, forgotten aspirations. Peace arrived in halting steps, not a sweeping gesture. Still, choice was always present. Forgiveness was possible, but never required. Sarah wrestled with that freedom. Could she let go without absolution? Could mistakes be acknowledged but not erased? She confided in friends and mentors, some of whom admired her for her strength, and others who counseled her to be wary. You owe them nothing, one friend insisted. Sometimes letting go is just for you, not them, another offered. Even her therapist, who had watched the slow thaw of Sarah's guarded heart, posed the question not as an imperative, but as a prompt. What does holding on serve now that you have your own life? Who do you wish to be, Sarah? Not just to your family, but to yourself. Sarah took the question seriously. She returned to journaling, filling notebooks with lists of grievances, but also memories of kindness, so rare in her youth as to seem like small miracles. Her father bringing her a soda after a hard day. Linda once tucking in the edges of her blanket before the world changed. She realized that while those moments didn't excuse the pain, they coexisted with it. The past was not a ledger to be balanced, but a puzzle whose edges never quite aligned. A turning point arrived late one autumn afternoon. Linda had arranged a simple meal at her own apartment, carefully cooking Sarah's childhood favorite, chicken and dumplings.
Margaret.
Not perfect, but filled with genuine effort. The table was set with mismatched plates, a bouquet of sunflowers at the center. As they ate, Linda set down her fork and reached across the table, hands trembling. Sarah, if you can't ever forgive me, I understand. I can't forgive myself, not yet. But what hurts most now is the thought that our story will always be just about suffering. Could we, maybe, try to find something else in the years ahead? It was this plea, not a demand, not an excuse, that loosened something, finally, in Sarah's chest. She realized in that moment that clinging to the pain had become a kind of legacy of its own, one she did not want to pass down. She looked at Linda and her father, not as antagonists, not as symbols of her trauma, but as flawed human beings, battered and remade by their journey together. They could never return to the innocence of before, but perhaps there was meaning to be found in choosing new roles now. Not as jailer and prisoners, but as survivors, architects of a different kind of family. Sarah let out a long, shaky breath. I can't promise it's all gone, she said, voice thick with feeling. Some hurts never leave, but I don't want to be angry forever. She looked at them both, truly seeing them. Not in the harsh, shadowed light of memory, but here, present, vulnerable. Let's try. Let's at least try. The decision didn't erase the old wounds, but it changed their shape. The days that followed were marked by tentative hope. There were still hard conversations, awkward pauses, the ghosts of yesterday, but also laughter, support, and fresh memories not stained by resentment. The more Sarah allowed herself to let go, the more she felt her spirit lighten, a sense that, for the first time, she was not dictated by her suffering, but by her courage to begin again. As the season shifted in San Francisco, fog rolling across the hills, sunlight warming city blocks, Sarah found herself looking forward, not back. She opened up more to Linda and her father, inviting them to celebrations, milestones, and ordinary days. The family they formed was imperfect, always threaded through with an awareness of what had been lost, yet also alive with possibility. Sarah realized that letting go wasn't about forgetting, nor was it surrendering her hard-won autonomy. It was an act of radical self-respect, a reclaiming of her present from the grip of her past. Ultimately, Sarah's final choice was not between vengeance or amnesia, but between carrying her pain forward or allowing it to rest. In choosing to forgive, not all at once, but steadily, day by day, she granted herself something her childhood could not give: peace, self-acceptance, and the freedom to love and be loved on her own terms. The past would always be a part of her, but it no longer defined her. The horizon, once out of reach, now belonged to her at last.